Well, here we are again, about to watch another episode of the classic, and I would argue legendary series by Innuendo Studios, The Alt-Right Playbook. And not only that, we're about to watch what was my first episode of The Alt-Right Playbook. I have not watched this in a good few years, but this was the very first video from him that I ever watched. And I did not know that this was part of a whole series at first, and when I found out that it was, I proceeded to binge all of it at the time, and I loved it. And I think I learned a lot from this series that allowed me to have a basis of rhetorical knowledge and rhetorical, like, just knowledge to pull from. Because just kind of knowing how crazy and shitty the far right online is, but not having the words to describe what they're doing, doesn't really make you a useful rhetorician. And I feel like I learned a lot of useful rhetoric from these videos, particularly in the deep analysis of the way that the alt-right operates as a decentralized, essentially terror group, trying to take over the Western world and subvert democracy and progressivism in our culture, in our media, and of course, in our elections. This was the first video from him that I ever watched, and I think it's probably his best. Maybe not the best, but I do feel it probably acknowledges the most core message I want all of you to know. Now, to be clear, this is a classic series, and while I think it stands perfectly fine on its own today as a masterpiece in political messaging and analysis, I do think that due to its age, some certain arguments it makes are a little bit outdated, not in their logic, but in their example use, where it's like, who the fuck is he talking about right now? I have never heard of this person before, like those moments. And besides not knowing who that person is, the entire line of logic is completely fair, but it's not necessarily fully remastered for modern audiences, so to say. And on top of that, the YouTube algorithm does not prioritize content that's more than a couple of years old all that much, meaning these videos have, barring any outside crazy factors that bring a massive audience to them, they've kind of run their route already. Like, they've done their race, they have ran their route through the virality of the YouTube algorithm, and it's unlikely that they'll get another big non-artificial boost in the algorithm again. And that's why I'm making this video, is to show you guys a series that many of you have never seen. Hypers in chat, if besides what I've shown you, you guys have not seen the Alt-Right Playbook series, because every time I ask this, a lot of you guys say you haven't seen it, which is just wild to me. TSW the Shadow Wolf? Werewolf Jester? Jeez, like 2 people right off the bat is already crazy for not having seen this series. Like, this is a classic. I would argue it's required watching. So, basically, just not to, hold ourselves back any longer, not to delay any further, let's hop right into it. My very first video I ever watched from the Alt-Right Playbook series, maybe the most valuable in terms of messaging to the average person on the left: never play defense. This video is spectacular, though I have not seen it in quite some time. I'm going to have a lot to say about it, I'm sure, but more importantly, I am very excited to get more people introduced to this video series. Let's start.
Say, for the sake of argument, there's this feminist media critic whose work you respect. Being an internet-savvy human in the information age, you sometimes share your opinions of her work on your various social media platforms. And you've noticed, whenever you speak positively of her, many different people come out to yell the same handful of things at you. It usually starts with, how can you support that con woman after she stole thousands of dollars from people? And you say, no, she didn't steal anything. She ran a crowdfunding campaign that people contributed willingly to. And, overwhelmingly, those people seem satisfied with their donations.
So here's an example of why, while these videos are fantastic, they are somewhat dated. This is the person being used as an example is Anita Sarkeesian, someone who really hasn't been relevant in politics in a good 4 or 5 years now. Like, very rarely do I bring up Anita Sarkeesian and not have to explain to someone in chat who's being talked about. But to give you a quick breakdown, Anita Sarkeesian was a feminist game journalist and critic who had actually built a substantial audience within the feminist sphere online years ago, like over a decade ago. She was actually really big on her YouTube, on her website, her private blogs. Like, she actually had a crazy big cult following, a surprisingly large one that would be considered big even today on today's internet, where everything is like 100K subs is nothing today, but it was like as big as 1 million subs is now back then, right? Like, her audience was so big, it would be considered large today too. A lot of people discount this fact or don't remember this fact, but she was actually huge. Now, Anita Sarkeesian was already very popular, and due to the high demand among her audience for a more cohesive, high-budget, and organized version of what she was already doing, she decided to start a GoFundMe for a video series she would make called Women versus Tropes in Video Games, or something along those lines, which would essentially just be a higher budget, more refined, scheduled, and roadmapped version of the thing that she was already very famous and well supported for by a very dedicated feminist audience, right? Tropes versus women in gaming, yeah. And this project was funded with a GoFundMe. Now, if you don't know anything about GoFundMe, if you've never made a GoFundMe, which I haven't, but I recently learned something about how the platform operates that, like, clicked this entire situation for me in my head of how blatantly dishonest this entire crusade against Anita Sarkeesian was. While I don't agree with everything she said or believes or all of her commentary, the response to her starting this series was very hateful. People did not like that she was using a feminist lens to critique video games, because, like, how dare you, right? Like, how dare you say that a beloved video game has sexist undertones, right? So obviously you had content creators making videos responding to it, and millions of people frothing at the mouth to watch those response videos and leave vicarious hate comments at Anita Sarkeesian through the comment sections of these videos, and it was a massive easy grift back then, right? Much of what the justification was for attacking her, though, was not that her politics were different or that her politics were bad. They didn't own that up. They didn't own up to that. Instead, they made up a conspiracy theory about how she had scammed her followers. What had actually happened is, if you know how GoFundMe works, when you start a goal, there is a minimum goal you can set and a maximum goal you can set. If you cannot hit the minimum goal by a certain date, the GoFundMe shuts down and all of the money gets refunded back to everybody who donated to the GoFundMe. If you exceed that minimum goal, then you can keep on raising money, theoretically indefinitely, until you hit a certain cap. Once you hit that cap, the GoFundMe then shuts down, and you receive all the money, and no one else can donate further. She had way more support for this project than she expected. The low end, as in, like, this was the minimum that the GoFundMe had to reach to not literally get shut down and start, like, having all the donations sent away, was $30,000. That was the minimum, that by a certain date, like a month or something, it had to hit. Otherwise, the project just wouldn't be funded. Everyone would get their money back. End of the story, right? But the maximum was, like, 300,000 or something. Like, I don't. It was like 130,000. But it is very normal for GoFundMes like this to set a very high cap. It's like, why would you say, no, my fans cannot support this, to this degree, right? Like, she was willing to say, okay, yeah, I mean, if you guys do donate $130,000, I will invest that into this series and make it even better, right? That's just how the platform functions. Either you have to set a really low minimum goal, and you want to set a high maximum goal, because you're not allowed to fall anywhere outside of those brackets, right? So you have to be reasonable with it. But the way that these people framed it was, she initially set a goal for 30,000, reached it, and then raised the goal up to like 138,000 or something, and demanded that her fans pay up or the series wouldn't end up happening. Now, a lot of people back then especially had never used GoFundMe, certainly had never made a GoFundMe, so they didn't know how these functions worked. They certainly didn't have the desire to be charitable to Anita Sarkeesian, considering they did not agree with her politics and they didn't like she was attacking the media they enjoyed with feminist critique. And so the lie that Anita Sarkeesian scammed her fans, despite her being very successful and having a massively loyal fan base that loved her and did not feel scammed, took off, and they used it as a moral justification for harassment.
And they say, yeah, she asked for $100,000 for a shitty little project. And you say, no, she got $100,000 because people got excited about her work and gave her more than she asked for. But the original pitch was only $10K. Also,
sorry, $10K was the minimum. So this video doesn't necessarily explain it well either, but the way GoFundMe works, the minimum was $10K. If it didn't hit $10K within a month, the whole GoFundMe would have stopped. The money would have been refunded. And $100K was the maximum bracket, and it reached that amount, and then the GoFundMe closed. And then she invested that $100K into the series. It's a completely normal way to operate a GoFundMe.
How many times have you given that number to people without looking it up? And they say, yeah, she asked for $10K and then never finished anything. And you say, no, she finished the project earlier this year. Of course, it took longer than it was originally pitched. You get 10 times what you ask for, and you're kind of obligated to make a bigger project, because if you didn't, that would be running away with 90 grand. Now, by this time, you've noticed your
People have the same misunderstanding with Hightail as well, because Hightail was announced in 2019, and then like a year later, or like 6 months after the announcement, Riot started talking with them about acquiring the studio and funding them billions to make the game. And it's like, oh, we kind of announced the game to come out in late 2019. And they were like, yeah, that's not going to be able to happen. And so they go from having this like 12-person low-budget indie project team to having a multi-billion-dollar funded project published by one of the biggest publishers in gaming, and they're like, we're gonna have to delay the game a little bit, because why would we not actually invest these billions of dollars or whatever into making this game, whatever it was, into making this game the best it can possibly be when it is the most anticipated game in recent memory, right? So yeah, a lot of people don't really have the capacity to understand the idea that a project suddenly getting a massive amount of financial support might make it take longer, because making that money matter to the project means delays. People hate delays. Delays make illogical people see red flags 100% of the time.
Interlocutor's position has changed from she stole from people to she asked too much to begin with to she took too long to deliver, as though these are all the same argument. And you also notice the pattern of the conversation. He says something short, quippy, and wrong. You give a detailed correction. He says something else short, quippy, wrong, and only tangentially related to his last point, and the cycle repeats itself. This goes on and on. And it's not, you've noticed, just this discussion. You find this manner of argument often when you express left.
Have you noticed how that is every single engagement with a conservative? Every single time. Always. This is what they do to you. There is a reason why, though. And he talked about this in the earlier video. There's a reason why they love saying these short, quippy, wrong, easily disprovable statements. Because while what they can say is just a few words, you have to type out a whole paragraph. Individually, they love the attention you give them by correcting them. They want you to correct them. That's why they make their statements so easily correctable. They want you to engage with them, to get trolled by them, to get locked in the mud with them so they can start like moving the goalpost and get you lost in an argument that's not even related to where it started. They will refuse to concede argument after argument after argument while pivoting to new argument after new argument after new argument, and you'll realize that they have pivoted off of 20 different points fundamental to their worldview and conceded none of them. and yet you are miles away from where the conversation started. They cannot defend any of these ideas, and yet they refuse to concede them. And so they just take you around the loop.
Left of center beliefs. You talk about the election, someone says you vote Democrat because you must have a conservative father you hate. You talk about polyamory, someone says if you have more than one female partner, you must be a sexist. Or they just say you're faking a non-regional accent. Yeah. The running theme here is all these people who ostensibly want a frank exchange of ideas spend a lot more time making accusations than asking questions. Because why ask what you believe when they can tell you what you believe and make you correct them? And if you ever don't go to the trouble of correcting them, must be because they're right. And you're not naive, you see what's going on here. This isn't about conversation. No, this is about boxes. When you say something cogent that they don't agree with, and they get the sinking feeling that you might start making sense, they need a reason not to listen to you. So they reach for a box to stick you in. Dishonest feminism, fake progressivism, daddy issue liberalism. No one in those boxes is worth listening to, which means as long as they've got you in one, they're not at risk of having their minds changed.
This has changed a lot over time in like what definitions they use. A lot of these are older terms from like the older culture war era. Dishonest feminism. Back then, I guess the most analogous like talking point now is the TERF movement. The idea that like the left is disingenuous in their feminism because they advocate for like trans people being real. They very frequently argue that this was a dishonest form of feminism that was actually a tongue-in-cheek kind of attack on women, right? Fake progressivism was the argument of the regressive left, a term that Dave Rubin coined when he started his big right-wing shift for the grift, for the money. He started claiming that as a gay man, he had to move to the right because the left had become so radical it became regressive, and he no longer felt safe as a gay man on the left because they advocated for like usually he claimed that like the left advocated for Muslim terrorists to come throw him off of a rooftop, right? That was like the common 2016 era talking point.
Which means as long as they've got you in one, they're not at risk of having their minds changed. This whole thing isn't even an argument with you. Not really. They're presenting themselves with arguments for why they don't have to listen to you. So your first reflex is to defy their expectations. Actually, my dad was a draft-dodging hippie who told me he loved me every day, and I never said what genders my partners are, but I promise they're all feminists. As for my accent, actually, I don't know what to do with the accent thing, but the point is, I refuse to fit in your box. And if they can't put you in one, if they can't dismiss you outright, they'll have to engage with your argument. But if you've spent any time arguing with angry dudes online, and it is mostly dudes, you know what I'm about to say. They don't. This accusatory, condescending attitude never falters, because a technique that has permeated anti-progressivism is to never play defense. Now don't get me wrong, what I said about the right fitting the left into simplified boxes as a way of preserving their own egos, I do think that's a thing, at least for many people much of the time. And I think the reassurance it brings is why the technique stays so popular. But that framing is about how individual people are feeling in isolated moments, and leaves out the larger game that's being played. Because there is a long-term strategic value to never playing defense, and it's less to do with arguments than with attitude. From your perspective, this debate about the feminist is a joke. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He comes in hot without confirming any of his assumptions. The whole conversation is you repeatedly schooling an ignorant dipshit. But that's only if you're the fool who listens to what's actually being said. Never play defense is a strategy that looks past language to posture. The tone, the word choice, even the expressions on your faces. If you half focus your eyes and look not at the words, but at the flow of the conversation, you can see the dynamic at play. He says his short, quippy statement, and you give your detailed rebuttal. He then picks a single point from your response and attacks that as the new subject. Now, to an onlooker, the logical brain would register that he's leaving 90% of your argument on the table, and that by changing positions, he's conceding he lost the first round. But the lizard brain notices that he's always making the accusations, always in the dominant position, that he's always acting, and you're always reacting. Regardless of what is said, he displays all the outward signs of winning. So on a purely emotional level, he leaves the impression of being right.
And this is fundamentally where a lot of the right's success comes from, is the fact that they're always on the offensive. No matter how separate from reality it is, as long as they're constantly levying a catapulted volley of allegations, no matter how unsubstantiated, no matter how many of them get shot down because they're lies, it doesn't matter, because some of them are going to get through. 3, 4, 5 of them are going to get through. And if one of those things is so emotionally, personally unacceptable to a certain person, once they believe it, like, they will have their entire worldview morphed by it. One guy just has to believe that Hillary Clinton personally slaughtered a bunch of people in Benghazi, and that will stick with them and decide who they vote for decades. And no one will know that's the thing that got to them, because they'll never even admit that's the thing that got to them. But from there, they'll just start to assimilate everything they hear from the right.
I have never had an argument look like this that wasn't in public. This is a technique that means speaking not so much to the other person as to the people watching. Liberals tend to operate as though voters are beings of pure reason and neglect that rational people still have emotions, and those emotions factor into what they believe.
No, but, like, Americans are not just emotional, they're stupid too.
And that long after this argument is over, when people only half remember what was said, what lingers on is what impressions the speakers made. Ronald Reagan coined the phrase, "If you're explaining, you're losing." The trick is, if he's always accusing, then you're always explaining. This technique of winning by looking like you're winning is
fundamentally the best way to attack the right. Would just be to constantly do essentially what the left did with the J.D. Vance couch thing. The idea that J.D. Vance was fucking a couch, just constantly repeating that over and over again. It's the same thing the right does. Like when that guy broke in to Nancy and Paul Pelosi's house and tried to kill them, the right unanimously started claiming that it was due to a gay affair that went violent. And they repeated it over and over and over and over and over again to try to get it as far and wide as they could. And once it had been so thoroughly debunked that it was really hard to claim that anymore, they completely swept that. But that doesn't change the fact that tons of people heard that, believed it, fell for it, and now that it's no longer a topic of contention or discussion, there are at least thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people who fell for that lie, and it informs their politics from here on out. And it's not even a topic up in the current culture war anymore. It's not something that's like going to be debated. So they're not going to have their minds changed on that particular issue, even if that was the thing that did it for them, you know? Anyway. Man, we got a lot of weirdo chuds in YouTube chat tonight. They don't seem to realize that YouTube chat is the gutter chat that we don't read.
Isn't new, and historically it's been used by both parties. But modern liberals seem especially susceptible to it because it plays on one of their big weaknesses, which is, and I say this with love, the liberal fantasy of putting someone in their place. Anytime a free speech warrior gets the Bill of Rights quoted to them when racists get historical accuracy explained by an actual historian, liberals take screen caps. We put it on Storify. We pass that shit around like it's theater popcorn. We live for the day an ignorant prick gets dunked on. I remind you, this was the central conceit of an entire TV show.
I don't say homosexuality is an abomination, Mr. President. The Bible does.
Yes, it does. Leviticus
18:22.
chapter and verse. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions while I had you here. I'm interested in selling my youngest daughter into slavery as sanctioned in Exodus 21:7.
How liberals
What
think
would a good
debate
price
works.
for her be? Does the whole town really have to be together to stone my brother John for planting different crops side by side? Can I burn my mother in a small family gathering for wearing garments made from two different threads? Think about those questions, would you? One
Cherry
last thing.
picking Christians.
Well, you may be mistaking this for your monthly meeting of the Ignorant Tight-Ass Club. In this building, when the president stands, nobody sits.
But let me ask you, in all these scenarios, who's doing all the explaining? The reason scenes like this are so satisfying is precisely because they activate the emotions. They present a world where giving a detailed explanation looks like winning, and where having one given to you looks like losing. Everyone wants to be Joseph Welch telling off.
The fact is, though, that's a fantasy. The idea of the educated, smart guy schooling the ignorant, loud, confident chud doesn't exist. You can't. The chud doesn't say something stupid, and the smart person debunks it, and everyone claps. That doesn't happen. The smart person has to say, "You're fucking stupid. You believe this, and it's wrong and dumb, and everyone who believes it is dumb, and you should feel ashamed." And before they can even start to try and defend what they believe, you have to start layering insults on them. Not necessarily on them, but insults on those who believe that, to make it not necessarily they should feel ashamed of themselves, but they should feel ashamed for believing that. You have to be on the attack. You have to find weaknesses in what they believe and jab at them and force them to explain themselves. One of the best examples of this is attacking Trump. Whenever you're in a debate with one of these people and you're constantly saying, what about when Trump did this? What about when Trump did that? What about when Trump did this? What about when Trump did that? And they try to explain it away, that's how you get them. You have to overwhelm them the same way they try to overwhelm you if you're going to engage with them. But I do still maintain that for the average person, you probably shouldn't engage with these people on social medias and stuff unless it's your job or you're like a professional debate guy or something, because they really thrive on your negative attention. Like, that's why they throw out the bait of like some easy to correct false statement. They want you to spend like 5 minutes typing a paragraph debunking what they said so that they can get you locked in for an argument all day. That is what they live for. I promise you, they live for that shit.
McCarthy.
At long last, have you left no sense of decency?
But the right has learned that if you never look like you're losing, you can convince a lot of people that you're not. And if you keep your statements short and punchy, people will remember what you said better than they remember the long explanation for why it's untrue. If done correctly, you might even convince yourself that you know what you're talking about. Now, again, this is not exclusive to the right. This is how most teenagers argue, regardless of their politics, where it's less important to be right than it is to be better than someone. But mixed with control the conversation, see previous video, the right has a full-bodied cocktail for manipulating how the left argues. But where it gets dangerous is in how the alt-right has capitalized on this. This argument isn't just about sticking a woman in the lying feminism box so she doesn't have to be listened to. It's also signaling to anyone watching what box they should stick her in. Even if an onlooker recognizes that she literally did not con anyone out of their money, the idea that how much she asked for or how long she took to deliver are relevant to her credibility is still planted in their heads.
What's really important is the box itself, right? Woke has become the most meaningless, broad, multi-tool that they've gotten, where they can just say, this person is woke. And most people in the online space, it seems, have enough of a negative connotation with that label that if you can successfully label someone woke, it doesn't matter how much of the negative claims made about that person you see debunked, you still put them in the woke box, and woke is bad. So there is no reason to be charitable towards someone in the woke box. And that's their goal. These arguments always happen in public. These chuds know that even 3 or 4 random normies stumbling upon this argument and having their minds changed by it is valuable in the long run. Every drop in the bucket has its part to play. They all recognize that.
It subtly suggests that the next time they feel threatened by a female media critic, maybe they should look at how much money she makes, how long her work takes to produce. Maybe they don't have to listen to her because they've got this handy box. So what's most valuable to the alt-right isn't who wins or loses any individual arguments, it's the mechanics of the argument itself. It's the boxes. Over the last several years, the far right has pushed hard on a number of reductive categories. The cultural Marxism box, the reverse racism box, even terms like beta and mangina are just shorthands for the failed masculinity box. The alt-right is a veritable box factory, putting huge swaths of leftist rhetoric, most especially that would rebut their core positions, into categories where they can be summarily ignored. And these myths have power if and only if they are immediately recognizable to a lot of people. And one function of this aggressive posturing is that they want to provoke an argument, to be so pompous that you are itching to
I've said this twice already in the segment. I'm glad he's restated this point from the previous one because it's so fucking true. They want you to respond. It is bait. When they say that short, quippy, wrong statement, it's bait, and they want you to waste your time responding to them.
Publicly take this asshole down, which gives that asshole access to your followers. It's about them introducing a myth to your audience and reinforcing that myth for theirs. And that myth gets spread even when you feel like you're winning. Now, I can't tell you the best way to deal with this, but I do know one way, which is to keep control of your own story. When someone comes out the gate with accusations, it's a big red flag that they are not arguing in good faith, which means you are not required to argue with them. When someone says something untrue, you can just tell your audience what the truth is without acknowledging the lie or the one repeating it. A detailed explanation does land a lot better when it's not being contrasted with a soundbite. Decide for yourself how your audience gets acquainted with a popular fiction, and never...
A really good example of this is the way that Joe Rogan argues about things. Let me see if I can find a clip of this. It's hard to find something so broad but also specific on a whim. Let me see if I can, though. Joe Rogan... Actually, I think I know. It's like the opening of one of his more recent episodes, actually. I should be able to find this fairly easily. I covered this. Yeah, the Adam Curry one at the beginning.
Joe Rogan Podcast, check it out!
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan Podcast by night!
My back pocket.
Like, watch a minute of this podcast. This is some of the most, unfortunately, persuasive rhetoric on the entire, well, not just the internet, but on TV, the internet, and any communication medium. Joe Rogan is the most persuasive, at least by numbers, by the impact he's had. Hate to admit it, but look at the way that he, quote-unquote, educates people or, quote-unquote, argues for his ideas. Let's just take a look. Let's analyze this for a second.
Then I got my teeth done, which we talked about, I think, the last time I was here. And Maverick, my periodontist, he did one of these 360 MRI. That could be dangerous, isn't it? People have no idea how important oral health is. It's really, really critical. And also, I feel better because
people that can be kind of woken up to why they're in this horrific pattern of continual abuse in their life. And there's ways to do it. And Rick Perry has been really like brave in this case because, he's a former Republican governor of Texas. And,
that's right.
And now he's advocating for Ibogaine therapy, particularly for veterans, for guys who come over. They've seen the most horrific shit. Their brain is in a shambles and they want to.
So he's basically talking about more of like, they go on to talk about methylene blue and like, other like alt medicine stuff too. But you'll notice it's like he's not arguing against the people, the doctors and the medical like consensus that these things are like that like methylene blue shouldn't be taken by people. He's talking about how, and this guy, he's talking about like he doesn't talk about it like there's an argument or a debate to be had. He simply talks about it like everyone who's in the know has his opinion, and he's in the know, his guest is in the know, and they're having a talk about something that only two people who know their stuff could be talking about. And so as a listener, you're not being persuaded by an argument. You're not being persuaded by a debate. You are being persuaded without realizing you're being persuaded. It's like you think like you're an investigator who has just stumbled upon a conversation you weren't supposed to hear. You're not being convinced that what these two people are saying is true. You think that you found two people who are not lying. They're saying something that, frankly, they might not have the will to say publicly, even though it's the biggest podcast in the world, and you're listening in on it. You feel like a detective who's just found the truth, or who's just heard something you're not supposed to know. Or you're part of the circle discussing topics that the mainstream doesn't allow to be talked about, that you've got some access that the average normie has precluded themselves from having access to because they're so afraid of hearing the wrong, dangerous ideas from Joe Rogan.
Never be too proud to delete a comment. In this political climate, these debates have real impact on real people's lives. They are not, in fact, a game of football. So if someone tries to force you to play defense, you don't have to play.
And there you go. Very good stuff this series. We are going to be diving deep into this. We're on episode 3, and we'll definitely be watching episode 4 in the coming days. I do want to spread these out a bit, make this last, and really hopefully bring as many people as possible to find out about this series who didn't already know, because I feel like there's going to be a big new swath of young people entering the online left in the coming years. Unfortunately, many of them are being hoovered up by Hassan and his tanky community currently, but eventually they'll grow out of it, and they're going to want to know how best to understand and argue against the right, and this classic series certainly won't be going into their algorithm, more likely than not, considering how YouTube treats older content, and I hope that if my stuff is in their algorithm, then my videos might help them discover one of the best series for progressives to watch ever made on this platform. Go click the original video link down below in the description if you haven't already. Leave a like and a comment on the original Innuendo Studios video. Go subscribe to his channel, and please send some support. This content deserves it. And if you want to support my stuff, if you liked what you saw, if you thought my video was entertaining, enjoyable, or educational, just if you think it's worth supporting in any way, consider leaving a like and a comment. It's totally free, and every single thumbs up and comment boosts my channel in the algorithm in real time, making it so more people see my stuff. It is actually the best and only way that we can counter the right in the media environment that they have dominated over the last few years online. I mean, really for the last decade online. So I really do appreciate it. Be sure to subscribe and ring the bell icon to turn on all notifications if you haven't already, so that YouTube actually tells you when I go live or upload new videos in the future. And of course, if you want to, see more from me on other platforms, you can follow my social medias linked down below. And finally, if you'd like to support me directly, help me keep the lights on and a roof above my head here at the Xander Hall studio, then please consider donating, subscribing, or gifting a sub on my website, xanderhall.com/live, or support me through YouTube, Twitch, Streamlabs, Stream Elements, Patreon, or buy some custom Xander Hall merch through the Streamlabs link down below in the description. Regardless of how you support me, though, thank you so much for watching, as always, and have a good one.